Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Mouthy Money podcast. I am joined today by Brian Byrne, who is Head of Personal Finance at Moneybox. Brian, hello, and welcome to the podcast.
Hello, thank you very much for having me.
So, Chris is away again today. He's off on his nice, long, well-deserved Easter holidays. But Brian is joining me today to talk about a really, really interesting subject. Something I actually, having covered personal finance now for nearly a decade, has always been a little bit of a pet project, which to the point where I must actually confess that I became a customer of it, is the lifetime ISA, the LISA. And I know, Brian, you are something of an expert, if that's okay to call you that, on the lifetime ISA and the LISA.
Absolutely. Hopefully I can live up to that.
So we've got some interesting stuff happening in the news around the lifetime ISA. We're going to call it the LISA just because that's easier for as an abbreviation. Before we get into the kind of the weeds on that and the really interesting stuff that we're going to look at today, Brian, just give us a bit of background on yourself and tell us a bit about Moneybox as well, who you work for.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am the head of personal finance at Moneybox. Before joining Moneybox 3 years ago, I was a financial advisor by trade. So I did that for 10 years before joining Moneybox, kind of initially in the high net worth end of the market in kind of private banking, very kind of traditional, old school. And then I moved more to kind of what's called kind of mass market. So talking to people about ISAs, pensions, savings, all that sort of stuff. And that's basically what I do here at Moneybox with half of my time. So I do financial education work with our customers. So teaching them about what an ISA is, what a lifetime ISA is, what a pension is, how they work, when's kind of sensible times to be using different financial products, all that sort of fun stuff. And then the other half of my role now is more public facing. So it's going out and kind of campaigning and advocating for policies and products that our customers need to build up their financial security. So the lifetime ISA now is a main one of those. Moneybox itself is a saving and investing app. We were founded back in 2016, just under the premise of rounding up your spare change and putting that towards your financial future. Initially, that was investing. We now offer savings products, investing products, home buying products, and retirement as well. But for the context of this conversation, we have the largest community of aspiring first-time buyers in the UK, most of whom are using the lifetime ISA and using it kind of very successfully. So that's my background kind of in a nutshell.
Brilliant. So that's what we're going to discuss today. We're going to kind of really dig into the lifetime ISA, the LISA, as a kind of an idea and a product in practice. Now, it's an interesting and troubled product, perhaps you might say. What's interesting, actually, as we're going out with this podcast, the Treasury Select Committee is actually convening again to talk about the LISA. Now, Brian, you actually spoke to the committee back in February, didn't you? Because they're looking at kind of what the future of the product is, and we're going to kind of come to this a little bit more. Just the background on some of what are the concerns that are kind of circling at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. The first thing I'd say, based on what we see day to day and week to week, the lifetime ISA is an absolutely fantastic product for the vast majority of people that use it. For those that don't know, you can save up to £4,000 per tax year, and the government will give you a bonus of £1,000 on top of that, on top of your savings, so a 25% top up. And you can either use that to purchase your first home, or you can use it to top up your retirement savings. As I say, for the vast majority of people, it works incredibly well, and I can go into some of the stats that we see, as I say, day to day, week to week, in terms of people getting onto the property ladder, people supplementing their retirement savings, and also just people becoming really, really healthy money habits based on the lifetime ISA. So it is very positive. There's a couple of areas where the rules need updating. So the lifetime ISA was launched on 6th of April 2017. So we are, 8 years since it was launched, pretty much exactly. The maximum house price that you can purchase a home for using the lifetime ISA is £450,000, and it has remained £450,000 since 2017. And we all know what house prices have done since then. And there's also a withdrawal penalty. So if you use the lifetime ISA funds for anything that isn't purchasing your first home or for your retirement savings, you get a 25% penalty. Now, you might think 25% bonus, 25% penalty, those two even out, but actually the way that the maths works is you lose some of your own savings as well as the government bonus. So there's just a couple of areas where some of the rules need updating since the product was launched 8 years ago.
Yeah. So looking back a little bit about, and I will confess at this point, excuse me, that I actually used the Lisa, and my wife and I both used it to save for a house deposit. Funnily enough, absolutely no relation. We're not giving away advertising here, but we did actually use a Moneybox Lisa because it was like, there was a good rate on it and that kind of thing at the time. We used a cash version, and we actually, over the course of we used it with that £4,000 kind of limit, which actually for me functioned more like a target to aim for each year.
Exactly.
We saved up, over 3 years, between us with the bonus, we got together a 30 grand deposit, and, we pushed really hard, and we actually did it and bought our house with it. So, two very happy kind of customers of the Lisa in that sense. And it worked really well for us. As you described there are some issues with it. But looking back at how it was created, am I right in saying that it's ended up being a bit of a halfway house where they were looking at it as a potential future replacement to pensions at one point, and that's why there's the kind of the retirement savings stuff is in there with it. There's kind of some slightly weird, that's why it's ended up being a bit of a weird hybrid of a product, right? Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's what it was designed to do. So George Osborne, who was the Chancellor at the time, specifically said, we're launching this product so people don't have to choose between saving for their first home deposit and for their retirement. Like sometimes we get stories in the press about should we allow young people to access their pensions in order to pay for a house deposit. They allow that in places like Australia, for example. But that's the exact solution that the Lifetime ISA was designed for. And as I say, I think it's fair to say that initially the first couple of years was a relatively slow start, but it is becoming incredibly popular since then. So you've got 1.5 million people actively saving into a Lifetime ISA today. Nearly 3 million people have benefited from Lifetime ISA since inception. We did some research for the Treasury Select Committee, basically, and 80% of people said it had gotten them into better financial habits using the Lifetime ISA. And of the people that used it to purchase their first home, 80% as well said that they will potentially return to the Lifetime ISA to supplement their retirement savings. And we know people in the UK are just not saving enough for retirement at the moment. So anything we can do to incentivize people to save more for their retirement going forwards is a good thing from my perspective. So yes, it can be seen potentially as a weird hybrid, but that's actually the whole kind of design of it. It's supposed to be more flexible than a pension in that you can access it to pay for your home deposit.
Yeah, no, obviously we don't do financial advice on the podcast. Everything we talk about is just for kind of informational purposes. The really interesting thing about the product, though, is as an alternative to pensions, it does potentially work quite well, particularly for a basic rate taxpayer, because the benefit of a lifetime ISA over a pension, well, for me, would be that at the end, when you go to draw down, when you withdraw from your pension, you're faced with all sorts of potential tax implications and rules that go with that, and the complexity that can come with that. Whereas a lifetime ISA, once that money's in there, I mean, as the rules exist today, obviously we can't talk about what might happen and change in the future, but as the rules exist today, once you meet the age requirement, which is it 60 for withdrawal from the Lisa? Yeah. There's no tax. You never have to pay anything on that. So it potentially quite a, from a tax efficiency, let's call it, perspective, quite an interesting alternative to pensions. And that's something that's not sung about, right? People don't talk about the benefits of that.
No, and I think the reason that they don't talk about it is that the maths can get reasonably complex depending on your tax situation when you are working and then your tax situation when you retire. But especially for nil rate taxpayers and basic rate taxpayers, the Lifetime ISA does compare very favorably, even when you're saving in the accumulation phase of your pension. And then you add on top of that, as you say, tax-free withdrawals at 60, whereas, as you say, pensions is a little bit more complex than that. One of the things that the Treasury Select Committee, which is this group of influential MPs that kind of basically pick topics that they are interested in and then write recommendation reports to the government about. One of the things that they were interested in was, are people giving up significant amounts of higher rate tax relief in favour of saving into a lifetime ISA? And typically speaking, if you're a higher rate taxpayer, you'd probably be better off in a pension rather than a lifetime ISA. But our data shows that 80% of people using lifetime ISA earn less than £40,000. And so it's not a case that people are giving up significant amount of tax relief to save into the lifetime ISA. And actually, the lifetime ISA is helping the exact cohort of people we would want to be helping in order to get their deposit together, because we know how hard the environment is to try and save for a deposit. We know what house prices have done. And the example that you've given there of yourself and your partner is, I think, exactly the use case that we should be using the lifetime ISA to celebrate. And typically people do get a bonus of about £3,000 each from the government when they withdraw from their lifetime ISA. And as you have quite rightly illustrated, you can also team up with somebody else as well. So as I say, I think it's a fantastic product that just needs a little bit of tweaks here or there to future-proof it for the next kind of 5 to 10 years. And that's what we're hoping the Treasury Select Committee process will lead to.
A lot of that, yeah. I mean, for me, and it kind of, you see this with other government schemes as well, in lots of different areas for, benefits, and even really good schemes like Help to Save, which is for people on universal credit, which is a fantastic, bonus that comes with that. A lot of the problem with it is the messaging and the delivery of that and the education around that, right? And that's, I guess, something that falls on you guys, and obviously you work really hard at that, because Moneybox is now, the number one lifetime ISA provider in the UK in terms of customers. That education piece is really important, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think one of the education pieces is really interesting is the behavioral side of things. So if you talk, from my experience as a financial advisor, if you talk to people about pensions tax relief, you've got about 3 seconds maybe before their eyes glaze over and you've kind of lost their attention. If you talk to them about a government bonus, they absolutely love it. And I say that's a really interesting kind of behavioral thing. So if you're talking about basic rate pension tax relief, you effectively get a 25% top up via the tax that you don't pay. But people, from our experience, are just far more interested in getting that 25% bonus because it's actually money coming into your account. And the lifetime ISA bonus is paid on a monthly basis. We see some really interesting behavioral stuff of when that bonus is paid, people log into their accounts, they top up so that they get the bonus next month. And we really need to lean into this stuff, in that tax relief will work for some people in terms of engaging them with their finances, which is the biggest challenge. But a bonus structure, the way the lifetime ISA is set up, works for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think that point about tax relief is really interesting, because you don't really see it on your pension, do you? You just get and they're very careful about the kind of the statements that they provide on with pensions and that kind of stuff. You don't get to see the good bit of it in that sense, do you? It's really interesting. I think the idea that you can kind of encourage people, and this is a bit of a bone that I always had to pick with pensions anyway, is the way we talk around pensions and retirement is exactly what you say. So boring, people just kind of glaze over. We should just rebrand pensions as something like a future wealth pot or something like that, and just almost, without wishing to be too trashy about it, sex it up, make it seem exciting for people.
Especially on tax relief. As I say, when you do explain and people understand what tax relief is, they think it's absolutely incredible. But it is such a high bar of people's interest when people have so much other things going on in their lives, and we make pensions and we make tax relief and all that sort of stuff so complex and inaccessible that you can't just dip into it necessarily for 5 or 10 minutes. As I say, you really kind of have to get under the hood and think, okay, this is tax I'm not paying on my paycheck, it's going into my pension, etc., etc. So yeah, for a long time I've said that tax relief in particular on pensions needs a rebrand, because it is absolutely incredible, but it's not the most accessible piece of financial jargon that we have.
So this is the potential opportunity with the lifetime ISA as a clean product that's different from the pension system. Looking at what your customers do with theirs, you've talked a little bit around it, but do you see any kind of big trends that people are doing? Obviously, I'm assuming at this point, because it's still such a young product, people are mostly just using it for, in fact, even the people who were the earliest to have been able to get access it, they wouldn't be at that point where they could get into the retirement pot yet, would they? So what do you guys see? What sort of deposit levels are people putting down and that kind of thing?
Yeah, we've got another 10 years before the first person's going to be able to withdraw from their lifetime ISA for retirement. So one of the things that we didn't mention is that you need to open the lifetime ISA before your 40th birthday, and you mentioned that you can withdraw it then when you turn 60. Because of that age restrictions, opening the lifetime ISA from 18 to 40, the vast majority of people use it for the home purchase use case. So whenever you ask a young person in this country, what's your primary financial goal? It is getting onto the property ladder. So therefore, as I say, the lifetime ISA for the home purchase goal is the more popular use case at the moment. But we are seeing the start of what looks like a decent transition from the people that use it for the home purchase goal over towards the retirement goal. I would not expect that transition to be immediate, and I said as much to the Treasury Select Committee, because when you get onto the property ladder, you're absolutely flat broke. You don't have two pennies to rub together, let alone think, how do I make additional pension retirement kind of contributions? You're just like, how do I get an emergency fund back together? How do I pay to decorate, renovate, whatever it might be once you kind of get onto the property ladder? But we are starting to see a decent transition there. And as I said, 80% of people who are using the lifetime ISA for the home purchase goal think that they will return to it for retirement savings in the future, which is absolutely fantastic. The other trend, you mentioned that you use the cash version of the lifetime ISA. There is also a stocks and shares version of the lifetime ISA, and the names do exactly what they say on the tin. Most people saving for a house purchase are hoping to do so within about 5 years, and therefore the cash lifetime ISA is the better version for that kind of time frame. Obviously, if you're saving for retirement, then you have a longer time frame, and the stocks and shares version may be more appropriate. So again, we're seeing a gradual shift over time from cash to the stocks and shares version of the lifetime ISA. But again, wider topic for another day. We know people in the UK, we need to make them more confident investors in general. And I actually think the lifetime ISA is a fantastic product to do that, because you do have that enforced time horizon of 20 years or so, which is absolutely perfect for investing. So those are some of the trends that we're seeing, and we're also seeing the product just becoming more and more and more popular every single year.
Yeah, and just thinking a little bit about we've kind of alluded a little bit to some of the drawbacks there, but there are kind of two very specific ones, aren't there, at the moment? And that's the first one is the kind of the limit on purchases, which hasn't gone up with kind of house price inflation, makes it particularly difficult for people in places like London where prices are higher to be able to actually use the product. And then when you combine that with the penalty, which you actually described earlier, somebody's in a situation where suddenly they can't get a house, but they've got a load of money in a lifetime. They're in a kind of double jeopardy, aren't they, where they're stuck with that money in the wrong place. What are the kind of discussions, and what's your sense of it? Are we going to get a bit of a turnaround on these kind of two big problems?
Fingers crossed. As I say, it's something that we, Moneybox, and I have been campaigning for the last kind of 2.5 years. And via this process of the Treasury Select Committee, we now have a vehicle, hopefully, to get these things through. So I've got kind of fingers crossed for autumn budget, which is probably the most realistic time for changes like this. The house price cap is an interesting one. So £450,000 buys you a lot of house in most parts of the country. So that house price cap issue is more of an issue for people kind of London and the southeast. And our analysis shows that it impacts less than 1% of Moneybox customers today. So it's not a massive problem. It does get quite a lot of headlines and gets quite a lot of coverage versus the number of people that it actually impacts. But that's not to say it's not something that we need to sort out. I don't think anybody thinks that the house price cap should be static forever. It doesn't make sense for it to still be £450,000 in 30 years' time, for example. So what we need is some sort of mechanism to make sure that it's uprated in line with house prices on a regular basis. And that's what we have consistently pitched to the Treasury, HMRC and the Treasury Select Committee, and just said, look, this should be annually reviewed in line with house price inflation. So fingers crossed on that one. On the withdrawal penalty side of things, as I mentioned, you get a 25% bonus, 25% penalty. That actually works out as 6.25% of your own savings, which we think is a little bit unfair. During the pandemic, that penalty was reduced from 25% to 20%. So in effect, you just lose the government bonus and you don't lose any of your own savings. And that was more than sufficient to keep people saving and investing for the longer term, but also allowing people access to their funds without penalty of their own money in a true emergency. So we think that you can reduce the penalty from 25% to 20%, make it a more equitable product, and still maintain the long-term savings nature of the product. So those are the two things that we're really campaigning for. As I say, even before this process, I've been knocking on the door of Treasury, HMRC, and the Chancellor's office for the last kind of couple of years. But these things don't happen quickly, and you do need a kind of political vehicle to get these things done. So I was absolutely delighted to see the Treasury Select Committee inquiry. And as I say, we will keep banging on those doors until this is done, hopefully.
Yeah. I mean, one of the questions I think in the inquiry was a straight up, should the lifetime ISA be abolished? And that struck me as quite surprising, as an extreme potential option to take. I mean, obviously the Treasury Committee is not the government, as you say. It is it's a group of influential MPs who discuss around, the area of finance and tax and money and all this kind of, important stuff. I'm guessing you probably don't see the end of the lifetime ISA anytime soon. But in the future, what would Moneybox and what would you like to see happen with the lifetime beyond those kind of fixing those key issues? What do we want? What does really good look like?
I think that the message that we gave to Treasury Select Committee, both in our written and oral evidence, is that absolutely incredible things are happening within the lifetime ISA. So of this kind of cohort, if you take kind of 18 to 40, and some people, as I say, a little bit older, if they've set up the lifetime ISA a few years ago, these are people that are saving and investing for their future consistently. These are people who are purchasing houses. About 250,000 people have successfully used the lifetime ISA to get onto the property ladder since 2017. And these are people who are taking active steps to supplement their retirement savings. All of this from a product that is still relatively new. When you talk about, it's been around since 2017. Typically people take 3 to 5 years to save for a house deposit, and it was a relatively slow start with the product. So it's not a particularly mature product, and yet incredible things are happening within it. So far from abolishing it, we should be building on the success of it. We should be doing those minor tweaks to make sure that it works for the next 5, 10, 15 years. And I think we should be learning from the lifetime ISA and taking that into potentially wider ISA reform that this government is also talking about. So, as I say, those are key takeaways.
I think that's really interesting, actually, especially the fact that so many people have actually used it for a house purchase, myself and my wife included. What would be really interesting, and we have a government who's very kind of focused on trying to figure out, well, how do you encourage growth? How do you make economic activity happen and this kind of thing? Actually, some sort of analysis would be really interesting of the economic benefits of the product, because you are in effect keeping the wheels of the property market going, which is quite an important part of the economy. You are enabling people to become homeowners, which we know encourages, people who own homes tend to spend money on them, they tend to start families, they tend to do all sorts of different things as a result of homeownership unlocks a lot of different things for families who are able to do it. So I think it would be really interesting to see what that wider impact could be as well, right?
I think that family point is very interesting. On the economic benefit side of things, is say first-time buyers add about 74 billion to the economy for all the reasons that you mentioned, as well as solicitors, mortgage brokers, all the activity that comes with that. We hosted a round table in Westminster about 2 or 3 weeks ago. We had a couple of politicians come along, and we also had some first-time buyers as well, people hoping to get onto the property ladder, and they were telling their story. And I think I'm guilty sometimes of talking about the house price cap and saying house prices have gone up 30%, so therefore we need to raise the house price cap. Actually, what those aspiring first-time buyers were saying was they've taken a reasonably long time to save up their deposit, so kind of 3, 5, 6 years. Their life circumstances have changed significantly over that period. So when they first started saving into their lifetime ISA, they were in their late 20s, and they were hoping, okay, maybe I might buy a one-bed flat in London for myself. They're now in their early 30s, and their life circumstances have changed. They have partners, and they're thinking, oh, actually, one-bed apartment may not be suitable for me now. We might like to kind of potentially buy a house, looking a little bit further afield, all that sort of thing. But those obviously tend to be a bit more expensive. So it's not just a case of house prices going up. It's also people that have been really diligently saving for a reasonable period of time, maybe looking to buy completely different properties than when they originally set out on their lifetime ISA journey. And some people are also kind of delaying starting families as well. So there's all this sort of knock-on societal impact for or something that we've modelled out from a lifetime ISA perspective is pretty cost effective, hopefully, for the government to do. So we feel like it's pretty kind of common sense. But as I say, you just need the kind of political vehicle and the political will to get it done. And fingers crossed, I hope that's kind of building all towards the autumn budget this year.
Yeah, I did. I once wrote a column posing the question to myself: why did you really buy a house? When I asked myself truly fundamentally, it's not. I've started a family, I have a son, etc. I'm married, blah blah blah. But the real reason I bought it was so that I could get a dog, because I could never get a landlord when we lived in London who would let us have a dog. Now we have a Labrador. So, life goals and that kind of thing. I think for me, it's like, it doesn't really matter actually what your goal is, as long as you're honest about that and those intentions, it can be great. And actually, for me, I don't mean to be a kind of relentless fan of the product here, but, it helped me and my wife do what we wanted to do, which was have a family, have a dog. That's that kind of security. So, I like you, would like to see it succeed. I think it's really important.
Yeah, and the stats kind of hide those individual stories. So that's why we do work pretty hard to do those kind of roundtables so that politicians can meet actual aspiring first-time buyers, all that sort of stuff as well, because it's incredibly important to bring this stuff to life rather than just say kind of stats, percentages and financial products, which, as I say, don't necessarily always kind of capture kind of people's attention. So, as I say, your situation is exactly what we should be trying to incentivize via financial products and the kind of tax system that we have. And also we've seen with the lifetime ISA that people very quickly then move on to other financial goals. So if you can help people hit their primary financial goal in life, which for most people is home ownership, they very quickly turn towards saving for other goals, be it starting a family, turning their attention to their pension, all that sort of stuff. So there's just so many knock-on impacts of this stuff.
Yeah, I think it's great. It's so aspirational, and it all forms that part of, what we're really big on here is telling people, have a plan, make a plan, these tools, and even the money itself. These are just things that we use in order to achieve what we want in our lives, right? And that what makes them good. It's what makes them bad. It's very encouraging to see that, we're having this discussion about how can we take this thing that's done really interesting stuff, how do we make it better, how do we help people achieve more what they want to achieve. And I think that has to be applauded, really. Brian, this has been really, really interesting. I'm very glad to have had Moneybox and yourself on to tell us more about the lifetime ISA. I think we await kind of the decision, some of the findings of the committee with interest. Do you know any chance when the findings are expected?
Most likely kind of end of May, and then the government has a couple of months to respond, but that includes the summer, so you're likely talking about a government response September time.
Yeah.
Which does lead pretty nicely, as I say, into the autumn budget. So I'd love to come back on at that point and celebrate, hopefully, some sensible tweaks are being made to the lifetime ISA.
Well, then let's put it in the diary for November. We can pop the champagne then, perhaps, and
nice.
Celebrate the successes. Brian, really, really fantastic to have you on. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you, everybody, for listening as ever. Chris is back next week, and we've got more guests as ever coming on. So do keep in touch, and we will see you all again very soon. Thank you, and goodbye. Thank you for tuning into the Mouthy Money podcast. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe on all our content. Follow us for more on your preferred podcasting channel, including Spotify, YouTube, or Apple Podcasts. Stay in touch by following our social channels on Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn. And don't forget to subscribe to the Mouthy Money newsletter on mouthymoney.co.uk. The Mouthy Money podcast is produced for general informational purposes only. It should not be construed as investment, legal, tax, or other forms of financial advice. If in any doubt about the themes expressed, consider consulting with a regulated financial professional for your own personal situation. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. Investments can go down as well as up, and you may get back less than you started with. Never invest more than you can afford to lose. For more information, visit fca.org.uk/investsmart for more. Thank you.